How we doing today? That's pretty good, but not good enough. How we doing today? That's good. I am happy to be here. Probably only the second time that some people would allow me an open mic at the state tournament. I'm just saying, yeah, they're laughing. Everybody else is like, you got that right. It's okay. First of all, I cannot believe that I'm looking at two people who I've known since they were freshmen in high school. That's not possible because I'm not that old. So that just can't be. I am overwhelmed to be introducing Alan Bates from Princeton High School. I'm just going to pretend like I'm not really that old, and we'll just go from there. First of all, when Alan texted me and said, hey, are you free on March 2nd? My first thought was, you're crazy if you think I'm coming to judge. That would be no. And then he told me that he'd been elected. I remembered voting, but then I never followed up to see who had gotten in. And I said, of course I will be here. I cannot imagine not being here for this. Here's the thing that you don't know. He really wasn't supposed to be here. According to his mom, she thought he was going to make his future in music. He was really good at the bassoon. Yeah, I know, really, the bassoon. I don't know what that's about, but she saw herself going to the symphony and his orchestras. And yeah, well, here we are, that didn't happen. So how did we get here? When he was a freshman in high school, the honors classes required, think about this, the English honors, if you could get away with this now, had to go to a speech or debate tournament. They had no choice. Yeah, good luck trying to make them do that now. But they could, they made them. And he chose debate, and he was hooked. He realized that debate was awesome. He debated for 4 years. He debated a year in college at Miami. He got a degree in journalism and said, what am I going to do? He worked for a little while at the NBC affiliate in Columbus, which I did not know until we were talking about this. But then he realized his true calling was to be teaching and coaching, and he went back and got certified, and 17 years later, here we are, which I think is amazing. And by the way, I'm still old school, just so you know. Yeah. As a student, as all of you know, speech and debate gives you something that you didn't even know you needed. It gives you confidence. It gives you critical thinking skills. It gives you a voice that maybe you didn't even know you had or wanted to have. Alan figured that out, but he got all of that and so much more because he realized debate was a tool for change with high school students. He realized even if you don't see the change right away, we know it's happening. He said that the coolest thing about coaching debate is the way you impact and work with students and the relationships that go far beyond the classroom. And all of you know that to be true. You look around at your colleagues, the students, you look around at the friends you've made and the relationships that you have with your coaches, and you know that's true. That he realized that that's really the critical part of debate. I hate to tell you this. There's no secret to his success. There's no secret, but it's something that's essential. He cares. He cares as a teacher. He cares as a coach. He cares that the students have an outlet for their voices. He cares that they learn valuable skills, even if they're not winning trophies. He cares that they understand that the debate and speech room at Princeton is a safe place to be, and that they don't have to have the prettiest clothes. They don't have to have the most money. All they have to do is care to and be willing to work and understand that they have to meet him halfway and that in the end, it's worth it. And you all know that to be true, because if the coach, the teacher doesn't care, you don't care either. And you know that in the classes you're thinking about right now. All of us, we've either been there or you're there right now. He cares. That's the secret. He cares. 17 years later, he still cares. He's still working hard. In his own words, he said that debate gives the Princeton changing school population a voice and a way to shine that they never had or ever thought they would have or even thought they needed in many ways, all because he cares. He's changing their lives. And it's not just at school, right? He's coaching them, he's teaching them. He understands that it's critical that they get all those skills. And that's what keeps him coming back. It's amazing that you continue to come back and give of yourself each and every year. That comes from your family, first and foremost. And I'm so excited to see you guys here. A lot of you won't know, his mom was a million years the secretary to the principal of Princeton, which we all know means she ran the school. That's right, you all know that, you all know that. They run the school, so you better be nice. But you taught him unbelievably caring and compassion that he is now giving to his students and his colleagues over time. I've known him a long time, and that part has never changed. In the end, he uses his voice as his instrument, not the bassoon, his voice. His audience is his classroom, his team, his colleagues at tournaments, places like this, instead of the symphony, but he's making the same great music, and I hope he continues to for some time. Nothing makes me prouder than to welcome Alan Bates into our family of the Hall of Fame.
To the students, to the coaches, to the parents, to the judges, to the friends, to the administrators, and to the family members, I want you to know one thing. You have chosen the right path. I entered high school in the 80s. Yeah, that's right. You can go ahead and count up how old I am. It is the great genes that I have, thanks to my dear mother and father, that I don't quite look that old. But I did, in fact, enter high school in the 80s. But a shy, short boy wearing glasses and looking much younger than I was, entered this enormous school called Princeton High School, trying to find my path and my direction. My sister had just finished her experience in high school that prior spring to me entering the building, and she made her mark in theater, commanding the stage, that oh so powerful voice of hers, and people remembered her as Bloody Mary in South Pacific. Everywhere I went, I would hear, your sister was great as Bloody Mary. What is she doing now? And so I knew I had two choices. Despite my love for theater, I could follow in her footsteps or choose another path. I would begin my freshman year in search of that path that I would take. I would start off by running for student council and gaining a position of leadership. I would remain in a leadership role all 4 years of high school. And that was fine, but it just wasn't quite enough. Later, I remember walking down the hall and a very tall, loud teacher who we called Mives. He served as a cross-country coach who always kind of hung out in the hallways, kind of on alert, looking for that athlete that he could just pluck out of the hallways and demand that in fact you played and run for him. And so I avoided that man. I did not believe that there would be any fun at all to running long distances. Unfortunately, one afternoon I let my guard down, and I felt the strength of his hands coming down on me, and him not asking, but telling me that I would be joining the cross-country team, and that I would be seeing him tomorrow at practice. Needless to say, that was not my path either. My experience of the cross-country team lasted just one short season. There is a place for everyone in speech and debate. As in freshmen in high school, as Marie mentioned, all debaters in honors English class were required to attend one speech and debate tournament. Clearly in the 80s you could kind of get away with something like that. That would just never fly right now. But I was of course faced with a decision, speech or debate. First, this was somewhat interesting to me because I did like to talk, and the idea of doing it competitively was quite interesting. Members from both the speech and the debate team, they came and talked to our class about how much they enjoyed speech and debate, etc. And it all sounded quite interesting. The problem was none of them actually looked like me. The students that came in to talk about speech and debate looked very different than I did. So while it interests me, I have to admit, at that moment, I was somewhat reluctant. In any event, I was more intrigued with debate more than with speech. Speech sounded more like theater, and as I shared with you already, I was looking at following a different path than that of my dear sister. So I clearly remember the first day of practice, when I met the woman who changed my life forever. I was sitting in room 515, in the back of the room, of course, when I could hear the voice of the 1982 Hall of Fame inductee, Mrs. Phyllis Barton, and the fast pace as to which she walked. I could hear her heels just hitting the hallway floor in a very fast pace. Needless to say, Mrs. Barton had won me over as soon as she entered the room. She was only about 5'4" tall at tops, but her voice took over a room. When she spoke, you listened. This woman was so compassionate and caring about debate that it was infectious. She truly believed in the impact that the activity could have on a student's life. She lived debate, and her dedication to the activity and her students has really contributed to my very own passion for the activity. I joined the debate team that freshman year, and I never looked back. There were challenges during that time, but there were moments that I had with Mrs. Barton that have just stuck with me. One was during our senior year. She was truly a competitive woman, and she lived and breathed the competition. And while she was ill my sophomore year, she bounced back. Her commitment to the 4 of her senior debaters was uncompromised. We were traveling everywhere: Michigan, New York, Georgia, now all of which was a violation of the Ohio state rules, but that's a completely different story for another day. Mrs. Barton's dedication to debate reached an entirely new level in January of my senior year. We were headed to compete at a tournament in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. And yes, we were driving in one of the red and gray vans that belonged to Princeton. And yes, Mrs. Barton would be driving us the entire way. As we were loading the van, snowflakes were falling, and I recall my mother, who was good friends with Mrs. Barton, and who also worked at the high school, asked her if she was sure she wanted to still head out. But you see, the snow wasn't going to stop us. It had stopped us the week prior to that tournament, and we were not going to be held back from debating 2 weekends in a row. This, of course, is very different than it is today. Then in the 80s, no one questioned Mrs. Barton, nor did they ever concern themselves with where we were going and how far we were going. Today, as many of us know, when we were trying to attend this year's Sylvania tournament, administrators appear to be much more hands-on. This year, on the Thursday before the Sylvania tournament, I received a text from my dear friend and colleague Melissa Donahue from Mason if we were being allowed to attend this year's Sylvania tournament. And I shared with her that it didn't seem likely. Her response was the same. But in the 80s, There was no administrators putting the kibosh on a trip because of a little snow. And so, the four of us loaded our evidence boxes into our van. Yes, back then as debaters, you actually had to go to the library, you had to photocopy all of your evidence. Then once you photocopied it, you brought it back, you then highlighted the evidence that you were going to use, you cut it into little pieces of paper, you pasted the paper onto index cards. And at the top of every index card, you labeled an argument, okay? And so you would carry thousands of index cards full of evidence with you. And back then, you actually did cut evidence, right? In any case, we were off to Cedar Rapids, the four seniors and Mrs. Barton. The very idea of driving all the way to Cedar Rapids today is ridiculous. And the idea of Mrs. Barton, who had bounced back from her struggle with cancer, would be driving us the entire way was even more ridiculous. But we were off, and night fell upon us quickly as we crossed the Illinois border, and the snow falling even more heavily at this point. Mrs. Barton would every now and then roll down her window just as the four of us would be falling asleep to basically freeze us out. No, she would not be the only one awake while she was driving. I remember the driving became more and more tedious because Mrs. Barton spoke less often to the four of us in the van and focused more on staying on the road. We entered the city of Peoria. I would find out later when all of a sudden I felt the van do a little bit of a jerk. And I remember Mrs. Barton saying just two words that we had never heard her speak before. We'll leave it at that. And before I knew it, we were spinning around on the road and plowing into the median. We ended up upside down on the road in the center median. As I gathered my thoughts, before I knew it, Mrs. Barton was already actually outside of the van, yelling at us to crawl out of the window before the van exploded. Now, to our good fortune, a semi-truck driver had pulled off to the side of the road, and he invited us into his cabin to stay warm while he radioed for help. Ambulance ride later, and we were at Peoria Hospital. I had a neck brace on and was wheeled out on a stretcher. And I remember vividly Mrs. Barton coming out in a wheelchair with bandages wrapped all around her, smiling as proudly as she could. You see, despite the fact that the van was completely totaled, despite the fact that we were lucky to be alive, and despite the fact that Mrs. Barton had 3 broken ribs, she proclaimed right there in the hospital, "We are getting flights to Cedar Rapids." We are continuing on. So I mentioned to you already that my mother and Mrs. Barton were close friends. Well, their friendship was put to the test at that moment. Essentially, my mother said if she didn't put us on a flight back to Cincinnati, she would be going to the superintendent. Needless to say, while my path did not take me to Cedar Rapids that weekend, it did take me to a point where I became so aware of how dedicated Mrs. Barton was to this activity and to me. My last interaction with Mrs. Barton as a student is one I will never forget. Our commencement ceremonies at Princeton always had a class oration, and I was so surprised when Mrs. Barton asked me to do it, and to be honest, I was quite nervous. I worked on the speech all my own, and I didn't share it with anyone. On the morning of graduation, Mrs. Barton drove to my home and picked me up and drove up to the high school. She took me into her room, and there I gave my speech to her a few times as she performed her coaching magic. On the ride back to my home, I thanked her and told her that I would see her later at graduation. It was then that she stated to me, "Alan, I can't be there. I'm not prepared to sit through graduation. I already heard what I wanted to hear. You will be great." I was initially shocked and saddened that my own coach, who I had spent 4 years with, would not attend my graduation. But later I came to understand what she meant by the fact that she couldn't sit for graduation. As she drove away that afternoon, I knew that she would have an everlasting impact on my life, and she has. I chose the right path. Along my journey, I've had the support and love of so many people. First, I have to thank my mother and father. The fact that the two of them are both here sharing in this day means the world to me, especially to my mother, who is celebrating her birthday today. Mom, for your unwavering support of me as a student and debater in high school, serving as president of our speech and debate boosters, to you, yours and Dad's support to me now as a coach. Thank you for both puppy sitting for me and providing a second home for my dog from November through March. I love you both. My sister, for inspiring me to be my best and to choose my own path. I love you for being here. To my past and present students that I have coached, thank you for sharing your weekends with me and by making me so proud of you all, of everything that you have achieved. To an incredibly supportive administration, your support of speech and debate has been unwavering. Thank you for having so much faith in me and in the program. Marie, thank you for your guidance and support, and more importantly, your friendship. You just make me smile when we get together. To my dear friends who made the trip up from Cincinnati, you have supported me 100%. Even though the activity has kept me from hanging out with you on some occasions, you are the team's #1 fan. Thank you for always being there. Your friendship means the world to me. Jerry and Elaine, ladies, you bring so much joy, and your commitment to the GMV district is just astonishing. Thank you. And finally, to my friends and colleagues that I have coached with, what a joy you have made it for me. You are such a great group of adults, all crazy in love with this wonderful activity. We have laughed together and sometimes even disagreed, but inevitably, I know that I have made lifelong friends. I chose the right path. When I first started coaching in 2000, I was coaching policy debate, and I followed that path of my dear mentor, Marie. In order to be competitive, you had to travel, and I mean travel. Texas, Carolina, Georgia, Michigan, Chicago, we were going everywhere. And each year, we got better and better. I didn't mind all of the traveling. I was young and I was truly enjoying myself. But something happened my 8th year into coaching. I had a moment that I will never forget. We were in Atlanta, attending the Emory tournament, and I stood looking out of the hotel room window, and I was so exhausted and just feeling so uneasy about things. And without any control, I just broke down and started crying. Standing there alone in my hotel room, I just could not stop crying. I had reached a breaking point that meant I had to make an adjustment. I knew how much I loved this activity, but I also knew that I had to get some balance in my life. And for my own sanity, I made some major adjustments with our program and my coaching. I share this story because this path hasn't always been easy. It is difficult sometimes, but it is because of these difficult times that you can appreciate all of the outstanding benefits that speech and debate provides. I say to you all, as you get ready to compete this weekend, when it is all over, regardless of how many wins you get or ones you receive, don't ever forget that you chose the right path. A path of success and disappointments, a path of laughter and tears, a path that you will remember the rest of your lives. Enjoy the journey.